New beginnings, cities and states. In this video, we will uncover the fascinating story of how new cities and powerful states emerged in ancient India. You will discover who the Janapadas and Mahajanapadas were and how cities became centers of trade and culture, and how these changes transformed people's lives forever. First, we have a quote by Kautilya from Arthashastra. The kingdom shall be protected by fortifying the capital and the towns at the frontiers. The land should not only be capable of sustaining the population but also outsiders in times of calamities. It should be beautiful, being endowed with cultivable land, mines, timber forest, elephant forest, and good pastures rich in cattle. It should not depend only on rain for water. It should have good roads and waterways. It should have a productive economy with a wide variety of commodities. So Kautilya, who is also known as Chanakya, was a great scholar, economist, and political advisor in ancient India. He helped Chandragupta Maurya establish the Mauryan Empire and is remembered as one of the most influential thinkers in Indian history. Kautilya believed that the strength of a kingdom depended not only on military power but also on good administration, efficient use of resources, and the welfare of the people. His ideas provide valuable insights into how ancient Indian kingdoms were organized and governed. He believed that a kingdom needed strong forts in its capital city and border towns. These forts protected the people from enemy attacks and helped maintain peace and security throughout the kingdom. And a well-governed kingdom should produce enough food and resources not only for its own people but also for those who might need help during floods, droughts, famines, or other calamities. This ensured that the kingdom remained stable even during crisis. And fertile farmland, forest, mines, elephants, and cattle were considered valuable assets. These resources supported agriculture, trade, construction, transportation, defense, making the kingdom prosperous and self-sufficient. And he says agriculture was the backbone of the economy. So a kingdom could not depend only on rainfall. Rivers, lakes, reservoirs, and irrigation systems ensured a steady supply of water throughout the year. And efficient transportation helped people travel and allowed merchants to move goods easily. Roads and waterways connected different regions of the kingdom and encouraged trade. A prosperous kingdom produced many kinds of goods and commodities. A variety of products encouraged trade, created jobs, and increased wealth, improving the lives of the people. So, Kautilya's vision of an ideal kingdom combined strong defense, abundant resources, reliable water, efficient transport, and a productive economy. These elements work together to ensure the safety, prosperity, and well-being of the people. Figure 4.1 Ruins of a major structure at Rajgriha, modern-day Rajgir in Bihar, when it was the capital of the Magadha Mahājanapada. So these are the ruins of a major structure at Rajgriha. Today, it is known as Rajgir in Bihar. Rajgriha was the capital of the powerful Magadha Mahājanapada, one of the 16 major kingdoms that existed in ancient India. The remains of these ancient structures remind us that Rajgriha was once a busy political and administrative center. Important decisions related to governance, trade, defense, and the welfare of the people would have been made here. The big questions are: what is meant by Second Urbanization of India? Why were the Janapadas and Mahajanapadas an important development in India's early history? And what kind of system of governance did they evolve? So, we will find answers for these questions in this chapter. Let us recall that in the early 2nd millennium BCE, that is over a few centuries after 2000 BCE, the Indus, Harappan or Sindhu-Saraswati civilization, which we called India's first urbanization, disintegrated. Some of its cities were abandoned. In others, some people continued living there. but reverting to a rural or village lifestyle. They had to, since all the components of the Harappan urban order had disappeared. Elaborate structures, both private and public, crowded streets and busy markets, different communities with specialized occupations, metalsmiths, potters, builders, weavers, craftspeople, and so on. A writing system, a sanitation system, the presence of an administration, and behind it all, a larger state structure with a ruling class at the head. A millennium means 1000 years. The first millennium BCE is from 1000 BCE to 1 BCE. The second millennium BCE is from 2000 BCE to 1001 BCE. The third millennium BCE is from 3000 BCE to 2001 BCE. Remember that in BCE, that is before Common Era, the years count backwards. So 3000 BCE is earlier than 2000 BCE and 2000 BCE is earlier than 1000 BCE. So, in the early second millennium BCE, it means the period shortly after 2000 BCE, roughly the first few centuries of the second millennium BCE. So, about 4000 years ago, the Indus Valley Civilization, also called the Harappan Civilization or Sindhu-Saraswati Civilization, was one of the most advanced civilizations in the world. It had well-planned cities, wide streets, drainage systems, markets, and skilled craftspeople. But around 2000 BCE, this civilization began to disintegrate. Disintegrate means to break apart or lose its strength and organization. Instead of disappearing overnight, the civilization slowly declined over many years. Many cities were abandoned while some continued to be inhabited by a smaller number of people. However, these places were no longer the busy urban centers they once were. People gradually returned to a simpler village-based way of life. As the cities declined, many features of urban life disappeared. Large public buildings were no longer maintained. Busy markets became less active. Skilled craftspeople such as metalsmiths, potters, builders, and weavers were no longer organized on a large scale. The Harappan writing system disappeared. The famous drainage and sanitation systems stopped functioning. There was no longer a strong administration to manage the cities. And for a whole millennium, urban life remained absent from India, though there may have been a few towns here and there in North India. Indeed, there were important regional cultures which we need not study here. So, after the decline of Harappan civilization, large cities disappeared from most parts of India. For nearly 1000 years, people no longer lived in big cities like those of the Harappans. But this doesn't mean that people disappeared. Life continued. Most people lived in small villages and depended on farming and rearing animals such as cows, buffaloes, goats, and sheep for their livelihood. There may have been a few small towns in northern India, but they were very different from the large, well-planned Harappan cities. The wide streets, drainage systems, and busy marketplaces that once existed were no longer common. Even though there were no major cities, people in different parts of India developed their own traditions, customs, and ways of life. These regional cultures helped shape the future of Indian civilization. So, this was a period when village life became more important than city life. Later, new towns and kingdoms began to grow, leading to the rise of India's second urbanization. Figure 4.2, the fertile Gangetic plains helped the Mahājanapadas to grow and prosper. So, as we learned earlier, India's first urbanization developed mainly in the Indus River basin. Now, during the second urbanization, many important Mahājanapadas grew in the Ganga Plains. The Ganga and its tributaries provided water and fertile soil for agriculture. Farmers could produce more food, which supported a larger population. As villages grew into towns and cities, trade increased and kingdoms became richer and stronger. So, just as the Indus River helped the first urbanization flourish, the fertile Ganga Plains helped the Mahājanapadas grow and prosper during the second urbanization. This is why so many important Mahājanapadas are found near the Ganga and its tributaries. Then, in the first millennium BCE, a vibrant new phase of urbanization began in the Ganga Plains, parts of the Indus or Sindhu basin and neighboring regions gradually spreading to other parts of the subcontinent. How do we know this? Mainly from two sources. First is archaeological excavations that have confirmed the existence of those ancient urban centers, and two, ancient literature describing them. Late Vedic, Buddhist and Jain literatures are full of references to these new urban centers. So after the decline of Indus civilization, many people lived in villages for several centuries. Then during the first millennium BCE, that is from 1000 BCE to 1 BCE, a new period of city growth began in India. This time many towns and cities developed in the Ganga Plains and parts of the Indus or Sindhu river basin and nearby regions. Over time, this urban development spread to other parts of the Indian subcontinent because large towns and cities appeared again, and historians call this period India's second urbanization. And how do historians know this happened? Historians use two main types of evidence. First one is archaeological evidence. Archaeologists excavate ancient sites and find remains of cities, buildings, roads, pottery, coins, tools and other objects. These discoveries prove that large urban centers existed during this period. Second is literary evidence, that is ancient texts also describe these cities. These include Vedic literature, Buddhist literature and Jain literature. These texts mention cities, trade, markets, rulers and everyday life, showing that urban centers were flourishing. This new phase is often called India's second urbanization, which incidentally has continued right up to today. Let us see how this phase emerged. So, the revival of new towns and cities during the first millennium BCE is known as India's second urbanization. The Indus or Harappan civilization was India's first major urban phase with well-planned cities such as Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. After those cities declined, most people lived in villages for several centuries, and later new towns and cities began to emerge, especially in the fertile Ganga Plains. As agriculture, trade, crafts and administration expanded, these settlements grew into important urban centers. This marked the beginning of India's second urbanization. Unlike the first urbanization, which eventually came to an end, this new phase of urban growth continued over the centuries. Many ancient towns developed into larger cities, new urban centers appeared, and the process of urbanization has continued up to present day. Janapadas and Mahājanapadas. Towards the end of the second millennium BCE, regional cultures gradually reorganized themselves in North India as people formed clans or groups, probably sharing a common language and common customs. Each clan came to be associated with a territory or Janapada led by a Raja or ruler. Janapada is a Sanskrit word which means where the people, Jana, have set foot, Pada, that is, have settled down. So, towards the end of the second millennium BCE, that is around 1200 to 1000 BCE, people in northern India began to organize themselves into larger communities. Groups of people who shared a common language, traditions, customs and way of life formed clans or communities. Over time, each clan settled in a particular area of land and came to identify itself with that territory. These territories were called Janapadas. The word Janapada comes from Sanskrit. Jana means people and Pada means foot. So, Janapada means the land where a group of people has settled. The Janapadas grew as trade networks expanded and connected them. By the 8th or 7th centuries BCE, some of those early states had merged together. The resulting bigger units were known as Mahājanapadas. Although the texts have different lists of them, the more frequent list gives the names of 16 Mahājanapadas extending from Gandhara in the northwest to Anga in the east and to Ashmaka in central India, close to the Godavari river. See map. There may have been a few more along with some smaller Janapadas continuing independently. So, as time passed, trade increased between different Janapadas. Merchants traveled from one region to another, exchanging goods and ideas. These growing trade networks helped connect the Janapadas and made them wealthier and more powerful. By the 8th and 7th centuries BCE, that is about 2800 to 2700 years ago, some smaller Janapadas joined together or were conquered by stronger ones, and as a result, larger and more powerful states emerged. These bigger states were called Mahājanapadas. Maha means great and Janapada means territory where people have settled. So, Mahājanapada means great kingdom or great state. Ancient text mentions 16 major Mahājanapadas. They were spread across a large area, from Gandhara in the northwest to Anga in the east and to Ashmaka in central India near the Godavari river. Besides these 16 famous Mahājanapadas, there are probably a few other states and some smaller Janapadas continue to exist independently. Think about it. Notice how many of the Mahājanapadas are concentrated in the Ganga Plains. There are several possible reasons for this, including the growth of agriculture in the fertile Ganga Plains, the availability of iron ore in the mountains and hills, see below about iron, and the formation of new trade networks. So, if we look at the map of the Mahājanapadas, we notice that many of them were located in the Ganga Plains. This is because the region had several advantages that helped powerful states develop there. First is, the Ganga Plains had very fertile soil. Farmers could grow large quantities of crops, producing enough food to support a growing population. More food meant more villages, towns and cities. Second, iron ore. Iron ore was available in nearby hills and mountains. People learned to make iron tools and weapons. Iron tools helped farmers clear forests and cultivate more land, and iron weapons strengthened armies. Third is new trade networks. New trade networks developed across the region. Merchants traveled between settlements, exchanging goods and bringing wealth. Trade also connected different Janapadas and encouraged the growth of towns and cities. Because of these advantages, many of the most important Mahājanapadas emerged in the Ganga Plains. Let's explore. The most powerful of these new states were Magadha, Kosala, Vatsa and Avanti. Looking at the map, can you identify their capitals? Also, how many can you match with Indian cities of today? So, among these many Mahājanapadas, 4 became especially powerful: Magadha, Kosala, Vatsa and Avanti. These states grew strong because of their fertile land, trade routes, resources and effective rulers. The capital of Magadha is Rajgriha, and today it is located in Bihar and it is called Rajgir. The capital of Kosala is Shravasti, and today also it is known as Shravasti, which is in Uttar Pradesh. The capital of Vatsa is Kaushambi, and today also it is known as Kaushambi, which is also in Uttar Pradesh. The capital of Avanti is Ujjaini, and today it is known as Ujjain, which is in Madhya Pradesh. Compare this map with the map of the regions mentioned in the Mahabharata. See figure 5.4 in the chapter India, that is Bharat, in grade 6, and list the names common to both maps. What do you think this implies? So now you need to compare this map with the map you studied in grade 6 in the chapter India, that is Bharat. We can observe that we have Gandhara, Matsya, Kosala, Panchala, Avanti, Ashmaka, Chedi, Magadha and Anga. These are common in both the maps. So this suggests that many regions mentioned in the Mahabharata were real geographical areas that continue to exist for a long time. It also shows that there is a connection between the period reflected in the Mahabharata tradition and the later period of the Mahājanapadas. So some of the clans and territories mentioned in the Mahabharata may have gradually developed into the Janapadas and Mahājanapadas of historical times. The map, figure 4.3, shows the Mahājanapadas capitals. Most were fairly large, well-fortified cities with a moat running outside the fortifications as further defense. Often, the gateways through the rampart walls would be deliberately kept narrow so guards may control the movement of people and goods entering or leaving the city. It is fascinating to note that most of those ancient capitals continue to be living cities today, modern cities that are often 2500 years old. Moat, a deep, wide ditch surrounding a fort or a fortified city and filled with water. In ancient times, cities and forts were often attacked by enemies. To make it harder for attackers to enter, people dug a large gap all around the fort and filled it with water. When enemies arrived, they could not simply walk up to the walls. They first had to find a way to cross the water, which gave the defenders an advantage. This water-filled area around the fort was called a moat. So, the capitals of Mahājanapadas were not small villages. They were large and important cities where rulers lived and administration, trade and other activities took place. Since these cities were valuable, they needed protection from enemy attacks. So, they were surrounded by strong walls called fortifications. Outside these walls, there was often a moat, a water-filled area that made it harder for enemies to reach the city. The entrances to the city were also carefully designed. The gateways were kept narrow so guards could easily watch who was entering and leaving. This helped them maintain security and collect taxes on goods brought into the city. And another interesting fact is that many of these ancient capitals did not disappear. They continued to be inhabited and gradually grew over time. As a result, several of them still exist as modern cities today, even though their history goes back more than 2500 years old. Early democratic traditions. Each Janapada had an assembly or council called Sabhā or Samiti, where matters concerning the clan would be discussed. Remember from the chapter on India's cultural roots that the words Sabhā and Samiti first appear in the Vedas, India's most ancient text. We may assume that most of the members were elders in the clan. The Raja was not expected to rule independently or arbitrarily. A good ruler was supposed to take the advice from these assemblies apart from the ministers and administrators. Today, when we think of a king, we often imagine someone sitting on a throne and making all the decisions. But in the Janapadas, a king was not supposed to rule like that. As we learned in class 6, the Sabhā and Samiti were assemblies mentioned in the Vedas. These assemblies continue to exist in the Janapadas. Whenever important matters affecting the clan had to be discussed, people would gather in these assemblies. Historians believe that many of them were probably elders of the clan, experienced and respected members. And whenever king had to make an important decision, he was expected to listen to the views of Sabhā and Samiti. He would also take advice from his ministers and administrators before making decisions. So, even though they were kings, discussion and consultation were valued. People believed that important decisions should be taken after listening to wise advice, not just according to the wishes of one person. That is why historians see these assemblies as examples of early democratic traditions in India. They were not democracies like modern India, but they show that the idea of discussing public matters and seeking different opinions existed long ago. Indeed, according to some texts, an incompetent ruler could be removed by the assembly. Of course, while such mentions are significant, it does not mean that this was an established law. Let us remember that the data we have for such remote periods is incomplete. So, if a ruler was not doing his job properly or was proving to be incompetent, the assembly could even remove him from power. This shows that a king was not always above everyone else. People expected rulers to govern wisely and listen to advice. Historians have found only a limited amount of information from such ancient times. Some texts mention the removal of rulers, but we do not know whether this happened regularly or whether it was an accepted law in all Janapadas. So, while these references suggest that assemblies could sometimes have significant authority, we cannot be completely certain how common this practice was. In their political systems, the Mahājanapadas expanded the basic principles of the Janapadas. Some were, in effect, monarchies, in the sense that the Raja was the ultimate authority, supported by ministers and an assembly of elders. His position was hereditary, in the sense that the Raja would usually be the son of the previous one. The king would collect taxes or revenue, maintain law and order, get impressive fortifications built around their capital, and maintain an army to defend the territory or wage war with neighboring ones, as the case may be. Magadha, located in part of today's Bihar, Kosala in part of today's Uttar Pradesh, and Avanti in part of today's Madhya Pradesh were among the most powerful such states. So, as the Janapadas grew into larger and more powerful Mahājanapadas, their political systems also became more organized. Many Mahājanapadas were monarchies, which means they were ruled by a king. The Raja was the highest authority in the state, but he was not expected to rule completely on his own. He was assisted by ministers and advised by assemblies of elders. The position of the king was usually hereditary. This means that when a king died, his son often became the next ruler. And a king had many responsibilities. He had to collect taxes from the people, maintain law and order, build strong walls and fortifications around the capital for protection, maintain an army to defend the kingdom, and sometimes wage wars against neighboring states. As a result, the Mahājanapadas became stronger and better organized than the earlier Janapadas. Among them, Magadha, Kosala, and Avanti were some of the most powerful states. However, at least two Mahājanapadas, Vajji or Vajji and the neighboring Malla, had a different system. The Sabhā or Samiti had more power and took important decisions through discussion and, if necessary, through vote. Surprisingly, this included the selection of the Raja. This means that those Mahājanapadas, which were called Ganas or Sanghas, were not monarchies. Their functioning might be called democratic, since members of the assembly were the ones to select the ruler and take major decisions. In fact, scholars have often called them early republics, as they are indeed one of the earliest such systems in the world. So, not all Mahājanapadas were ruled by kings. Magadha and Kosala were monarchies, while Vajji and its neighboring state Malla were following a different system. In these states, the Sabhā or Samiti had much greater power. Important matters were discussed in this assembly and decisions were taken collectively. If the members could not agree, they could even settle the matter through a vote. And what is more interesting is that the assembly could also choose the ruler. In other words, the ruler was not automatically the son of the previous ruler, as happened in many monarchies. And because the assembly played the most important role in decision making, these states were called Ganas or Sanghas. They were different from monarchies because power was shared among the members of the assembly rather than being concentrated in the hands of one hereditary king. This is why historians often describe Vajji and Malla as early republics. They are among the earliest known examples in the world of a system in which important decisions were made through discussion, consultation, and voting. Figure 4.4, ruins of a complex at Kaushambi, capital of the Vatsa Mahajanapada. So, these are the ruins of an ancient complex at Kaushambi, which was the capital of the Vatsa Mahajanapada. An archaeologist excavate places like Kaushambi, they find the remains of buildings, walls, roads, and other structures that once formed part of a busy city. Although the city is now in ruins, these remains help us understand how people lived more than 2500 years ago. The ruins are important because they provide archaeological evidence for the existence of the Mahājanapadas. They show that Kaushambi was not just mentioned in ancient texts but was a real and well-developed urban center. So with this, we have completed the part 1 of the chapter New Beginnings, Cities and States. I hope you found it easy to understand. If you want to see more videos like this, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching. We will see you again in our next video. Bye bye.